Welcome to Figure Eight, where we feature inspiring stories of women entrepreneurs who have grown their businesses to 7 and 8 figures revenue. If you're in the mix of growing a bigger business, these stories are for you. Join us as we explore where the tough spots are, how to overcome them, and how to prepare yourself for the next portion of the climb. I'm your host, Julie Ellis. I'm an author, entrepreneur, and a growth and leadership coach who co-founded, grew, and exited an 8-figure business. This led me to exploring why some women achieve great things. And that led to my book, Big Gorgeous Goals. Let's explore the systems, processes, and people that help us grow our businesses to new heights. If you're interested in growing your business, this podcast will help. Now, let's get going. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Figure Eight. Today, I'm in conversation with Dr. Joan Fallon, who is the founder and CEO of Curemark. She's a visionary scientist dedicated to improving health and well-being of children all around the world. And Curemark is developing novel therapies for diseases and going through the whole process of fundraising and FDA approvals and all of the different things. They've got a fast track status on one of their drugs, and we're going to talk about that today. And she has been widely recognized for her work, both as a scientist and as an entrepreneur. And I am very excited to talk to her today. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you, Julie. I'm honored to be here today to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm delighted to have you. I'm delighted to have you. And I'm so interested to hear, how you embarked on this journey, which is now coming into being a lot of years, right? The path to having, seeing a problem, building a drug, going through all the approvals, even with a fast track is many, many years long. And so why don't you start with what you identified in the research you were doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's interesting because for many years, drugs were developed by Big Pharma by looking at novel compounds and looking at their properties, ones that you could patent, and then looking at their properties and sort of retrofitting them into diseases. And some of them worked well and some of them didn't work well. This is a different pathway for discovery. And it's really true translational medicine. So, being in practice, late 80s, early 90s, I started to see children who had different symptomatology than I had been familiar with. So, they had delayed speech, and sometimes significantly delayed speech, expressive language, and they had no eye contact. A lot of them showed, obsessive compulsive like behaviors, but they fit a pattern that was emerging. And so what it turns out to be is the beginning of all these cases of autism. So it was intriguing to me because I had not seen them in the years prior to that. But as I started to see more and more children, what emerged was a pattern of symptoms that, while they're categorically the same, were not the same child to child. So if a child didn't have good expressive language, for example, some would not speak at all. Some would recite whole, I call them the soliloquies, whole parts of movies, right? Like Toy Story, or they spoke a lot but didn't have any meaning to it. So it was a category, but it was different child to child. And that's true. It was true for all of their symptoms. So if they had sensory issues, some didn't like the loud noises, some didn't like the seams on their clothing. But what was more similar child to child was what they ate. And I thought, that can't necessarily be by chance. Why would they all eat the same? And when I say the same, it's of course not every child, but the majority of them ate high levels of carbohydrates. Parents described it as white diets and tan diets. I say, what did your child eat? And they say, oh, it's only white food. And as I looked at all of those numbers as they accumulated, I called it the 10 thing diet. It was pastas without sauce. It was French fries. It was chips. It was bagels. It was all carbohydrate and very little protein. And if they had protein, a lot of it was very processed protein. So like a hot dog or a chicken nugget. And so I kept thinking that cannot be by chance. So I worked with 5 children and their families, and we did blood and urine and stool examination to see if there was anything protein related. And it turned out all 5 of those children had very low levels, like almost nascent levels, of a particular enzyme that digests protein. And we tested child after child. My colleagues tested children, and we assembled a large number. And if let's say, depending on the lab, that the levels were 10 or 11 or 12, these were like 0.5, 0.2, 1.0. So there was no mistaking this finding.
So they didn't want to eat protein because when they did, it did not make them feel good because they
I
couldn't
think if you can't
process it.
digest it, then it feels like a rancid piece of meat in your stomach. And so they were very, and parents described them being like vehemently against eating those things. And children, they go through cycles of food eating, right? When they're young. So they'll eat all of this, only want this one day, and for like a month, that's all they eat, and then they don't want it anymore. They want something else. And that's pretty classic. This was the same over many years. And so that finding, which was a low level of chymotrypsin, which is a enzyme that digests a great deal of the protein, but it breaks off the most important amino acids. And they're called essential amino acids. And that always takes people back to their high school biology class. And in an essential amino acid, you can't make it in your body. There are other amino acids that you can make, but these you can't make. And there are important ones like tryptophan, which forms the basis of serotonin, and phenylalanine, which forms the basis of dopamine, and norepinephrine, epinephrine. So without that, you're theoretically at a lack of those neurotransmitters because you need those things to make it. And so it was an interesting finding. I early in that journey, I was at a family dinner, and my brother says to me, "So what's new?" I said, "Well," and literally what I said was, "I found this funky thing in these children." He's like, "Well, what does that mean?" And I explained to him, and he said, "Well, do you think that replacing it could help?" And I said, "I don't know. We could test it. I don't know." And he said, "Well, look, if you think it can help the children with autism, you need to patent it so that it has a value so people will ultimately use it." So I went down that road, which I had never thought I would find myself patenting things. But then we saw, and then when I've had that finding, there are a lot of related conditions, such as Parkinson's, which is a neurodegenerative condition, but it also has its origins in the gut. And so we tested people with that, and sure enough, mid to late stage Parkinson's had a similar finding. And only, I think, earlier this week or last week, there was this big breakthrough. We think autism and Parkinson's are related. Well, I've known that for years, that they're
Right.
related, along with other conditions, right? So like schizophrenia and other things. So I think that people pay attention to neurodegenerative conditions. So if you have a parent or a friend or someone who degenerates from their normal state, so Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, those things, people get panicked over it. There's a lot of money thrown at research. But when there's a neurodevelopmental condition, the thing is, well, that kid's never going to have the normal development. So therefore, why would we put all the money into researching that? And I've written a piece, I think it was in Fast Company, talking about the disparity in the NIH monies that are directed to these conditions. And so I made the bold jump to form a company. And I founded the company when I had a couple of things. One was an okay from FDA to go forward. I hired an FDA expert and we met with them. I had 2 patents, right? So I had the 2 patents, and I had all these tests that showed that these kids had this deficiency. And again, it's not everyone, and this is not a cure, it's a treatment. But I embarked on looking to see if we could help these children. So I formed a company, and then I had to raise money, right?
Yes. And you had to raise a lot of money.
Right. That's right. And, fortunately, the trials for something like this, which don't involve multiple blood tests and other things, are less expensive, but nonetheless, I had to raise significant money. And so I I met a woman through Springboard who now actually works for us, and she took me up and down Sand Hill Road in San Francisco, in Palo Alto, to meet with all the venture capital people. And they were like, "Look, we don't know what causes autism. We don't know what even the outcome measures that are the right ones. So therefore, we're not going to invest in autism." And they haven't, and they still haven't invested in treatment. They invest in behavioral treatments. They buy all these centers now. It's a big money making business. But in terms of drug, because there's been so many failures, big companies have tried to crack that thing, and they haven't. They haven't. Mostly, I think, because they think of it as a psychological and a mental issue, and I think it's more of a physiological issue. And so, as a result of that, we embarked on these trials. And at first, when I went to the doctors who were the experts, I thought, I'm looking at a gut brain mechanism. Are these psychiatrists, are they going to understand that? They were like, yes, absolutely. We think there's other origins in the body for this. And so they enthusiastically went into the trials with us.
Well, what's it like? I mean, here you are, you're a clinician with a practice, and, suddenly you're patenting things and becoming an entrepreneur and raising a lot of capital. I mean, that's a really, really big shift, just fundamentally in terms of like how you see something and it kind of becomes your life's work. And yet the role changes that's brought.
Right. So I took sort of a pragmatic view of that. And the thing about me is that I know what I don't know. And I think that was very helpful in this because although I have a background in physiology as well, I didn't know how to do a clinical trial. And even though I wasn't going to we have a CRO and all of those things, I I knew that if there were people that were not doing well in treatment in clinical trials for these children, I needed to know the ethics of clinical trials. I needed to know a lot of things. So Harvard Mass General had a program that I went to. So at one point in my life, I was practicing, I was writing patents, and I was going to school in Boston 2 days a week, and using my retirement money. Yeah, right. And I use my retirement money to do all of that. Right, I was all in. If I was going to go in, I was all in. And then one evening I was at friends who I've known for years. I was at their house, and her husband got up and went to the drawer in the kitchen, took out a checkbook, wrote me a check for like $300,000, and said, "Just leave practice and go for it." And I said, "Okay," and I did. And so, and it was daunting at times, right? It's like I didn't know how to do many things, but I had great mentors, people who saw what I did, who understood what it took to kind of leave what I was doing, that I loved, and start something new. And so I had terrific lawyers. And I'm not from that business world or from that pharma world. So there were things that are done in those worlds that are not intuitive to me. They just weren't intuitive. Like the later you invest money, the more preferences you get with that money. And in my mind, the people who invested in the beginning took all the risk. Why don't they get the preference? So I did it backwards. I mean, it's really they get the return of their money first, and it's a small amount compared to what we sort of now have a valuation of. But I just felt like, why would they get rewarded later when they didn't take the risk? And I had phenomenal lawyers, and I would say to them, "Is there any reason why I can't do that? Is there something like not kosher, or is something not right about that?" And they're like, "No, it's just how convention doesn't mean anything to me. If there's a better way to do something."
Yeah. Well, and that kind of speaks to what the research is and what it is you're doing. hmm So let's talk about a little bit about patents. So in those early days, you had that conversation with your brother, who said patent that, and we talked about how lots of times women, if you look at the number of women who are pursuing patents and think about patenting things, it can be quite low.
Right. That's right. So just before the pandemic, I actually testified in front of Congress about this. And I believe that there is a um, issue with women ownership of their own things. And there's lots of anecdotes out there about, for example, Watson and Crick being not the ones who actually saw the double helix. It was the woman who ran the microscope who identified and wrote about it first. So, and didn't get part of the patent or part of the Nobel Prize. So there's a lot of that out there. But I think just even on a regular note, women don't own their own ideas, inventions, those kinds of things. And I think it's historical. So while patents are one of the most egalitarian processes in this country, and it's in the Constitution, right? So you can invent something, you will forever be the inventor. But there's also a person who is the assignee who basically owns it. And when women patented early on, and it was only a couple of years after the first patent was done in this country that a woman did a patent. Um, she couldn't own it. She couldn't get any of the money from the invention. Some male person had to do that in her family, and that lasted until the mid 1800s, and then they could own their invention as well and reap the benefits financially from it. But if that's our historical legacy, if that's what's in our past and our mother's past and their past and their past, ownership of that kind of thing is not intuitive. It wasn't intuitive to me. And I have a brother that's, invented something very young and then retired and, did other things. So I feel like I was exposed to it and yet it wasn't something that I could own. So I think it's very important. And also when women and entrepreneurs in general, it's a very expensive process. So oftentimes they leave it to the last, to the end. But when I went out to raise money, it was very important that I had 2 patents.
Yeah, I believe that because then they know that you're building a moat around what it is you're protecting, what it is you've discovered.
Yes, exactly. And even more basic than that, some other regulatory body recognize that it's unique.
Yes, it's not just unique in your own view and in, what you in the research you've done. It has
Right.
also been vetted, I guess, if you want to
Yes.
look at it that way. Yeah.
Right.
Now you talked about Springboard, and I know you're now on the board there, but how did
Right.
that organization really help you in terms of both the IP piece, but the fundraising piece especially?
Right. So the IP piece, my brother he works for me now, and he keeps track of all of that, which is great. But Springboard was founded by a woman named Kay Koplowitz. And Kay was one of the very successful women entrepreneurs who she herself had trouble raising money. She started the Madison Square Garden Network and the USA Network, and has served on the board from everything from HBO to Liz Claiborne. So she's been a very prominent woman now, investor and board member. But she started this to expose women to sort of the right way to raise money for your company, to help with your pitch deck and all of those things. And one of the most valuable parts of Springboard that I have found is that the network, your fellow entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship is very lonely, especially as a woman entrepreneur. And so now you have a whole cadre of women, around you doing the same thing and going through the same struggles. And it was it's been a very wonderful experience in that way. And I think it's something that if you're a woman entrepreneur and you find yourself in that space, you really should go through the Springboard training and go to their events. You'll learn tremendous amount.
Yeah. Yeah. And you really do need to build that network. Because I think also, it's harder to get funding, all of the things that you talked about. It's also like when you're a woman with a business, you're still wearing all the other hats that we wear in our lives, right? Whether it's with your parents or your kids or, family obligations of other kinds. And, you're the CEO of many things, not just your
Right.
business.
Right. That's absolutely true. And I think that uh, the camaraderie that comes from that is very helpful. And like I have one person who say, I have this great investor who just made an investment in us. I think he'd be perfect for you, or she'd be perfect for you. Let me make an intro, and always looking out for the other one, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, of course, that happens is, you have then an awareness of who's coming up behind you. And when do you get to a point where you can start investing in the people that are coming up too, right? I mean, there's
Right.
a cycle that starts to be able to develop.
Yeah, and that's a very important thing. And so people ask me all the time to invest in their companies, which I'm able to do in little bits because I'm still an entrepreneur. But I think it's important to I'm like, I'm still an entrepreneur. I get it. I got this big thing going on, but I'm still an entrepreneur. So
Yep.
yeah,
And so take us back now to you started with clinical trials and you've been jumping through all of the many hoops on your
right,
way to an approval.
right,
But it's a very long road that is very expensive.
right. It's very expensive. It's very long, and the thing that you need to keep in mind is that entrepreneurship is full of ups and downs constantly, right? And so if you're on the down, the up is coming. And I've learned to ride that kind of wave because it's happened over and over and over again for me. And you need to have a lot of tenacity. I mean, I've heard in the last 2 weeks more people say to me, you have perseverance like I haven't seen. I said, well, I have a mission, right? I see that I've done the clinical trial. I see that it's helpful. And now we have to get it approved and we have to get it out to the kids. My thing has always been, because I would never want to see myself as a pharma person or a biotech. I always said I went kicking and screaming into biotech. And so, but now I've traveled the globe, and I was, in the last 8 weeks, I was in Qatar and in China, where the problem is the same. And so they need that help as well. So our tagline in the company is it's all about the kids. And
Which
it's
is
about getting this
amazing.
to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how does it work in terms of like obviously the FDA is regulating the drug within the United States, but it's also a world-known body. Is it like the gateway for drug approvals or like how does that part work for you?
That's a great question. In some countries, it's the gateway. In other countries, they require you to do some level of trial there, depending on where you're going. And so I think that uh, getting this approved here will be helpful in many countries. And some, we need to help them go through the approval. So there's some countries like China where we can't go in and do clinical trials. We need a Chinese pharma company to do that, and we would have a partner, and we're in the process of doing that now, and is meeting with the companies
Selecting a
and
partner.
picking a
Yeah.
yeah, picking a partner who can get it to their children. I've met with the physicians there. I met physicians in the Middle East where there's a very high number of kids with autism, and they understand this, and they want this more than anything for their kids.
Yeah, well, and I think I, have some notes of, those autism rates from 1 in 500 down to 1 in 350 to now 1 in 31. I mean, that's pretty startling, really.
It is, and I think that many of the other countries that report lower rates actually are catching up, and they recognize that.
Yeah. And so now, how do drugs go to market? I mean, obviously, once you get that approval, somebody's got to make the drug.
Right,
And
that's
and
right.
and so is that another partnership for you?
Well, it's a partnership now in any case. So we don't make the drug, right? We outsource this manufacturing. We had a lot of challenges in the beginning because of the kids. The kids have lots of sensory issues, right? So so sort of the thickness of the drug, and it's a sprinkle on food. It's a little packet, they sprinkle on the food. So they can't swallow a pill. So when you're giving it to a 3-year-old, that they can sprinkle on their food. The sizing of the particles had to be such that they couldn't detect it on their tongue. We had to have it tasteless, and we had to have it delivered in a part of the gut that prior there's been no drug to do that, right? So we had it because we were targeting protein digestion. It had to be done very early in the GI tract, and so it had to get through stomach acid and then be able to be released. So we had to kind of scour the globe to find a coating that would work. But the other thing is that we don't have any extraneous. We have the enzyme, and we have this, lipid coating. So it's a oil coating, and when it's spun at high speeds and high temperatures, it becomes a solid around the enzyme. And so we solved a lot of problems in the very early time because I didn't want a drug that had like dyes and extenders and all those things that are in every drug, not ours. And we have given in these clinical trials and the extension of the clinical trial, which still goes on today, over 1.2 million doses of the drug. And we've had no related serious adverse events at all in over 12 years of giving this drug. Yeah. So it's safe. I mean, I couldn't sleep the whole time we were doing trials because I was always worried. You don't know. We believed it was safe. We believed that we had, but you don't know.
Yeah. And now you talk about, so do you have participants who have actually been involved over a lot of years at this point?
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
that must be really interesting to track them. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not to longitudinal studies yet, but like you will get there.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring that up. We did what they call a delayed start analysis. And so what that does is look at long-term results. So very often you go through the double blind and you get efficacy. But if you go out a little further, it reverts back. And that's true with a lot of drugs that they found. So this particular analysis, which tracks the drug over time, delineates between symptom modifying and disease, or we call disorder modifying. So if you have a double blind where the drug has more efficacy, and then you give the placebos the drug, sometimes they then look exactly like the drug treated children. That's a symptom modifying. But if you have a result where the continuation of the improvement is there, but the placebo lags behind the drug treated children from the earlier part of the study, then you know you have a disease modifying. And we published those results in JAMA at the end of 2023.
Oh, that's so
So we
interesting.
know that it's a lasting effect. And again, these kids are all different, right? And they all start at different kinds of, some are very severe, some had less severe, but they all had autism. We had to triple screen them to get them in. So we paid a lot of attention to who they were and what they had to, not take during the trial. So, for example, we counted 37 off-label prescription drugs that these kids were taking when they showed up for the trial. And they had to come off of them because we couldn't, a lot of ADHD drugs and other things. So they had to wash out and then they can come into the trial. So,
Right, because otherwise your results are modified potentially.
right,
Right.
exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. Yeah.
so fascinating. So fascinating. And so I think world changing, really. I mean, getting into this final, you're in the final stretch now. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this can change and improve lives for people.
And it's a different paradigm. And I think that that paradigm not only will help these children, but will help other biotechs and other pharmas to look at things a little bit differently. Because, traditionally psychiatric drugs are like one molecule, one receptor, they go in that, and that's it. With a lot of off target side effects, right? Uh, and so this is improving a lack or a missing part of the biology, the physiology of the child. So looking at that in a different way, I think is really important.
Yeah. And I mean, and I don't know, is it that as women we look at the world a little differently, and your curiosity about, that connection that was different than how other people would have looked at it. I mean, it started a great journey, that's for sure.
Right.
But it is that interesting piece, right? Of what does it take for someone to have that different viewpoint?
So I think there are two things. One is that I looked at it from a deductive viewpoint rather than an inductive. So allopathic medicine is all inductive. You have symptoms, you put them together, you have a diagnosis, you get a treatment. But here were these kids who had deficits or differences. Why did they have those differences is a deductive model. So we took a deductive finding and put it through a very inductive clinical trial process. And so that's different. And the other thing is that very often entrepreneurs are afraid of risk. We're all afraid of risk, period, right? And so I think it's something that guides all of our behaviors. But both of my parents, someone asked me a long time ago, why are you and your brother both entrepreneurs? How did that happen? Him very early and me very late. And I said, my parents were both, my mother was an actuary and my father was a big lines underwriter for like Lloyd's of London. Um, and AIG and so risk was something you managed. It wasn't
Definitely
something
in
you're
those
afraid of.
professions, you are managing risk.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were never afraid of risk.
Right.
They just knew that you had to manage it
Manage it.
correctly.
That's so
And I think it's
interesting.
very important. I
It
try to teach
is.
people, other entrepreneurs, about risk.
Yes. Well, and I mean, certainly, the risk of not taking the risk, right? Like there is
Right.
that, that it never can happen, right? Like
Right.
if you had not been able to, you know, take that investment and leave clinical practice, if you had not like that, just that risk of, it's taken you with a very full-time effort this long to get this far, you would have not made that progress if you
That's right.
hadn't
That's
taken
right.
those calculated risks.
Yeah. Right. And as I said, I went kicking and screaming into biotech, but I had to do it because if I didn't do it, I would never know. Right? You would never know if it could have helped these children.
No, and I'm
And
sure
while
like
I knew,
it's changed your life also.
oh, completely,
Yeah.
completely, and I think that the journey, the doors open all the time. Like you're thinking, oh, I'm on the down cycle. What happened? And the next thing you know, I get a call or an email from someone saying, "Hey, I would really like to meet you. I heard about what you're doing," or "I'm somewhere." So it's been an amazing journey, and the people I have met throughout this time have taught me something all the time.
So good. So good. Well, it's been really great talking to you, and I can't wait to hear when the drug gets approved and how you are making a difference for even more people in this world. It's a great story, and thank you for sharing with
Thank
me.
you.
Yeah,
I'll come back on here after it's
I
approved.
would love that very much. All right. Thanks, Joan.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss any episodes. Figure 8 isn't just a podcast. It's a way of seeing the big, gorgeous goals of women entrepreneurs coming to life. If you're interested in learning more, you can find my book, Big Gorgeous Goals, on Amazon anywhere you might live. For more about my growth and leadership training programs, visit www.julieellis.ca to see how we might work together. Read my blog or sign up to get your free diagnostic. Are you ready for growth? Once again, that's www.julieellis.ca. When we work together, we all win. See you again soon for another episode of Figure 8.